Prester John was a legendary Christian king who was thought to reign over a wealthy and mighty land somewhere beyond Europe's known frontiers. For centuries, European monarchs were tantalized by stories of this distant ruler who could, if found, become a key ally in the struggle against the Islamic powers of the Near East. The earliest known mention of Prester John appears in the mid-12th century. In 1145, Otto of Freising, a German chronicler and bishop, recorded a remarkable conversation with the bishop of Jabala in Syria, who had told him of a mighty Christian king ruling in the east. This Christian ruler, said to belong to the Nestorian Church, was regarded by European Christians as a distant but potent ally who might help retake the Holy Land. About 2 decades later, in 1165, a mysterious letter began to circulate across Europe, claiming to be from Prester John himself. Addressed to various European rulers and including the Pope, this so-called letter of Prester John described an opulent kingdom in an unknown land. Although it's now believed to have been a forgery created by one or more enterprising authors, the letter captivated medieval Europe's imagination. Initially, people thought Prester John's domain might lie somewhere in the Far East, possibly within the mysterious bounds of India. Note that this was a loosely defined region in medieval thought that often included East Africa and much of Asia. The existence of prosperous Christian communities in parts of Asia, notably the Nestorians who had established enclaves as far as China, made the notion plausible. Moreover, travelers' accounts, limited contact with distant Christians, and ongoing crusading ambitions combined to spark persistent rumors. Over time, as Europeans acquired a slightly better sense of Asian geography, Prester John's supposed location began shifting on the maps. When it became harder to imagine such a powerful Christian king hidden in Asia, people started to look toward Africa, particularly Ethiopia, whose Christian kingdom was known to Europe. By the 14th and 15th centuries, many Europeans had become convinced that the Ethiopian emperor might be the elusive Prester John, or at least his descendant. Ethiopia had a long Christian tradition dating back to antiquity, and its rulers did claim a lineage that stretched to the biblical Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. Contacts between Europe and Ethiopia increased as European powers, especially Portugal, sought new allies against the Ottoman Empire and its vassals in the Red Sea and Indian Ocean regions. Portuguese explorers ventured around Africa's Cape of Good Hope and established direct trade routes to the east. This provided them the opportunity to engage with Ethiopia's Christian kingdom. While the Ethiopians were real Christians with a distinct church, they certainly weren't the fabulously wealthy and all-powerful king and kingdom described by the Prester John legends. That said, in the minds of some Europeans, these Ethiopians, with their vast gold reserves, could fill the role of Prester John's kingdom regardless. But let's step back to the early 13th century for a moment to discuss a less likely candidate for the kingdom of Prester John. In the early 13th century, as news of the Mongol conquests drifted into Europe, a swirl of rumors and misconceptions took shape. Genghis Khan and his Mongol hordes completely destroyed significant portions of the Muslim world. Many who heard of this brutal conquest thought that this powerful ruler must be the legendary Prester John, given the states he appeared to be targeting at that point. For those who are unaware, the Mongols weren't known for their peaceful policies towards any of their neighbors, to put it extremely mildly. Notably, this was fueled by the fact that a small but significant minority of the Mongols were indeed Nestorian Christians. It took Europeans time to fully realize that the Mongol Empire, while including Nestorian Christians among its subjects, didn't operate under a Christian banner. As more reliable information filtered back, it became clear that Genghis Khan and his successors were not the legendary Prester John, but a wholly different and far more dangerous force. The historical development of the Prester John legend can't be separated from the religious and political context of the time. Crusader Europe, struggling to hold on to the Holy Land, desperately wanted a powerful Christian ally in the East. The papacy and various European monarchs imagined that Prester John's armies could arrive from behind enemy lines, crushing Muslim forces and restoring Christian control over Jerusalem. This strategic desire may have driven the circulation and acceptance of the letter of Prester John. The letter offered hope and fueled centuries of fruitless search, becoming one of the medieval world's great geographic and religious enigmas. By the time the Age of Discovery gave Europeans a more accurate global picture, the notion of an undiscovered Christian kingdom seemed increasingly unlikely. As explorers mapped the coasts of Africa, sailed to India, and made contact with East Asia, they encountered many wondrous lands but no elusive Christian potentate, as described in the legend. By the early modern period, it was fully accepted that Prester John never existed, but that does leave us with a significant ongoing historical mystery. Who forged the letter from Prester John that was circulated around the monarchs of Europe, and for what purpose? The question of whether King Arthur was based on a historical figure or a purely legendary construct has fascinated scholars and enthusiasts for over a millennium now. While later medieval romances depict him as a chivalrous king surrounded by noble knights and magical advisors, the earliest sources that mention Arthur paint a far more realistic picture. Even today, historians don't agree on whether he existed as a real person, a warlord, tribal leader, or king, in the tumultuous post-Roman landscape of Britain, or whether he was a composite of multiple historical figures and mythic archetypes that grew into legend over time. The earliest references to an Arthur-like figure appear not in grand histories or detailed biographies, but in sparse, often cryptic texts. One of the oldest and most widely cited possible references is found in the work of Gildas, a 6th century British cleric. In his text, De Excidio et Conquestu Britanniae from the 6th century, Gildas discussed the battles between native Britons and Romano-Britons and the Saxon conquerors. He never explicitly names Arthur, but he does mention leaders and battles that later sources would connect to the Arthurian tradition. Notably, he does mention Ambrosius Aurelianus as a Romano-Briton leader who fought against the Saxons. This absence of any direct reference is telling. If Arthur was truly a well-known leader of Gildas's time, why did he remain unnamed? The next major piece of evidence comes from the work attributed to Nennius, a Welsh historian who wrote the Historia Brittonum in the 9th century. Perhaps most importantly, in this text, Arthur is finally mentioned by name. Nennius lists 12 battles fought against the invading Saxons, supposedly under Arthur's command. Although this account puts Arthur into a historical context, it doesn't provide conclusive proof of his existence. The work is considered semi-legendary and was compiled from earlier oral traditions, possibly mixing historical fact with local folklore. Notably, many cite this work as proof of an oral history of a Welsh tribal chief being the inspiration for Arthur. There are no independent sources confirming these battles or Arthur's leadership. Still, Nennius is an important stepping stone in the development of the Arthurian narrative, as he is the earliest source to clearly position Arthur as a warrior figure battling Saxons. Another early source worth mentioning is the Annales Cambriae, compiled in the 10th century, which records 2 events associated with Arthur. It discusses the Battle of Badon and the Battle of Camlan, the latter supposedly where Arthur and Mordred fell. These annals are brief, leaving no solid clues as to whether Arthur was a genuine historical character or simply a legendary hero inserted into the historical timeline to explain past events. By the 12th century, the narrative of Arthur had taken a decidedly literary turn. Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britannia is one of the most influential works in shaping the Arthurian story. Geoffrey claimed to present a reliable history of Britain's kings, but modern scholars universally agree that his work is a blend of fact, legend, and pure invention. In it, Arthur emerges not as a mere war chief, but as a grand king presiding over a glorious court. This portrayal, though compelling and immensely influential in medieval literature and beyond, significantly departs from the sparse militaristic mentions that might hint at a historical figure. Instead, Geoffrey's narrative served as a catalyst for the rich body of Arthurian legends developed by later medieval writers, who added elements like the Round Table, the Grail, and courtly love. Notably, the Monmouth account quite clearly isn't set in late antiquity, but rather is very firmly rooted in ideas and technology of the Middle Ages. Modern historical inquiry into the question of Arthur's historicity often focuses on the socio-political climate of 5th and 6th century Britain. After the withdrawal of Roman legions, Britain faced waves of invasions and migrations. Several British warlords and chieftains rose to defend their territories against Saxon encroachment, and it's plausible that the figure of Arthur originated as an idealized war chief. Archaeologists and historians have searched for evidence, fortifications, battle sites, names in contemporary documents, but so far, nothing definitively points to an individual named Arthur. The absence of contemporary documentation is a significant problem, but doesn't necessarily discount the existence of an Arthur-like figure. Britain in the post-Roman era wasn't producing detailed written histories comparable to those of the classical world. The surviving texts are scarce, and many were compiled centuries after the events they describe. As you may have gathered, modern scholars have expressed significant skepticism about the idea of Arthur as a historical individual. Others who advocate for a historical Arthur generally rely on significant speculation to do so. The debate remains unresolved, and serious historians tend to remain agnostic on Arthur. They generally acknowledge that while there might have been a real individual or individuals who inspired the legends, the stories we know are saturated with myth and literary embellishment. Let's face it, the King Arthur we picture, presiding over a chivalrous court, leading a cadre of chivalrous knights, and advised by a powerful wizard, never existed. The Round Table and Merlin's sorcery are medieval literary inventions, romanticized additions. Still, beneath those legends, there seems to have been a historical core. A local war leader who achieved a significant military victory. This leader was later remembered in scattered literary references and evolving oral traditions. What really happened to the Knights Templar's fabled treasure is a question that has fascinated historians, archaeologists, and enthusiasts for centuries. Formed around 1119, the Knights Templar were a Catholic military order charged with protecting Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. In time, they became known not only for their fierce martial prowess, but also for their significant wealth accumulated in the Levant. By the 12th and 13th centuries, the Templars had accrued immense wealth, acting as a kind of proto-banking institution for Europe's nobility. Also, to editorialize just slightly, the Templars were going to find out pretty soon what Biggie Smalls taught centuries later. Mo money equals mo problems. Yet when the order was forcibly disbanded in the early 14th century, their fortune seemed to vanish into thin air. Scholars have long struggled to provide a definitive answer, but while many theories abound, few are supported by solid evidence. During the height of their power, the Templars managed vast estates, farms, vineyards, ships, and a sophisticated financial network that spanned much of Christendom. They were entrusted with precious items and money from crusading lords and even kings. As such, the notion of a Templar treasure conjures images of chests packed with gold coins and jewels. but the historical record does not explicitly mention a massive single trove of treasure hidden away by the order. Instead, Templar wealth was typically spread across various commanderies and holdings in Europe and the Near East. The downfall of the Templars began in France, under King Philip IV, who was deeply in debt to the order. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, he orchestrated the arrest of key Templar leaders, accusing them of heresy and other grave crimes. Also, according to my research, this may be part of the reason why we associate Friday the 13th with bad omens. In the ensuing years, Templar possessions were seized or transferred. Crucially, a large part of Templar property went to the Knights Hospitallers, a rival military order also known as the Order of St. John, following a papal decree in 1312. But the question remains: did the Templars have a secret stash of gold and precious artifacts that was spirited away before the authorities could lay hands on it? Some early sources suggest Templars may have anticipated the crackdown. Some accounts mention carts leaving the Paris Temple, the order's headquarters, just before the arrests. These anecdotes have sparked theories that a portion of their treasury was removed and hidden. Yet no contemporary document confirms the existence of a large secret hoard. The Templars, being meticulous record keepers, didn't leave any unambiguous inventory that would hint at a concealed fortune. Moreover, what Templar wealth could have been liquid or portable might have been used to maintain their far-flung network of commanderies, to pay stipends, and to fund their military campaigns. Over time, legends have become entangled with fact. Early modern writers seized upon the mystery, and treasure hunters have speculated about the presence of Templar gold hidden in crypts, caves, or even transported overseas. The notion that the Templar treasure ended up in Scotland, supposedly enabling the Templars to assist Robert the Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, is one such popular tale. However, historians note that no credible contemporary sources link Templar wealth to that event. Similarly, claims that the treasure sailed to North America centuries before Columbus have no scholarly support. However, one popular story connects the treasure to the Oak Island money pit located on the island of the same name in Nova Scotia, Canada. Historians generally agree that it's most likely that the treasure never existed as a singular mythical cache. Instead, what we might call the Templar wealth comprised a network of resources: farmland, mills, churches, preceptories, and precious metal reserves. When the order was dissolved, the church and secular authorities meticulously appropriated and transferred this wealth. Naturally, significant corruption likely also led to a lot of the Templar wealth falling into private hands. Interestingly, the Templar treasure isn't even the most bizarre mystery surrounding them, and I'll be covering who or what they allegedly worshipped in a future episode of this series. The Man in the Iron Mask remains one of history's most enigmatic figures, a prisoner whose true identity and the reasons for his prolonged imprisonment continue to captivate centuries later. His story is intricately tied to the reign of King Louis XIV of France, under whose orders he was detained. The earliest records date the prisoner's confinement to July 1669, initially under the pseudonym Eustache Doger. He was held in custody for 34 years, with no contact whatsoever with the outside world aside from his jailer. He was also closely guarded by the same jailer, Saint Mars, moving with him from prison to prison, eventually ending his days in the Bastille in 1703. The prisoner was known for the mask he reputedly wore, popularized as being made out of iron. Contrary to popular legend, historical accounts suggest it was more likely made of black velvet, less cruel, but equally effective at concealing the prisoner's identity. The conditions of the Man in the Iron Mask's imprisonment were designed to ensure total isolation. Historical documents indicate that he was moved several times between various prisons. The cells were specially modified to prevent eavesdropping, with multiple layers of doors to seal off any sound. Reports indicate he was well treated and wore fine clothes, suggesting his high status or the importance of the secrets he held. The severe restrictions placed upon him, including threats against speaking in isolation from other prisoners, suggest his keepers believed he held secrets that could potentially threaten the French state. However, given this, it is unclear why he wasn't simply eliminated, again suggesting some further importance to this man. Contemporary documents surfaced during the 19th century and included some of the correspondence between the jailer and his superiors. In these documents, the prisoner had been labeled, quote, only a valet shortly after his arrest, and that he was jailed for what he had seen, what he knew, and what he was employed to do. After his death, his cell was immediately stripped and whitewashed, and his belongings were destroyed, steps taken to ensure that his identity would remain hidden forever. The identity of the man in the iron mask has spurred numerous theories. One prevailing theory posits he was an Italian count and diplomat named Ercole Mattioli, who was involved in diplomatic negotiations with Louis XIV and double-crossed the French king. His identity closely matches that of the man buried under the name Marchioli, leading some to speculate that the Italian count and the man in the iron mask were one and the same. However, his known death date and some discrepancies in the timeline weaken this theory. Another popular candidate is the valet Eustache Dauger, arrested for reasons not fully documented, adding layers of mystery and speculation. Some historians speculate that the valet might have been involved in or privy to political scandals that required his permanent silence. This theory is supported by the specific instructions given to his jailer to prevent him from communicating with anyone except to express his immediate needs. However, this theory is weakened by the fact that if this had been the man's identity, he would have almost certainly been taken care of in the old-fashioned way. Yeah, you know what I mean. Taken behind the barn and given the old yeller treatment. Voltaire and later Alexandre Dumas were instrumental in cementing the legend of the man in the iron mask, each adding their own speculative spins. Voltaire proposed theories that ranged from the prisoner being a twin brother to Louis XIV, to a disgraced nobleman or a disgruntled governmental official. Alexandre Dumas also explored the idea that the man in the iron mask was the twin brother of Louis XIV, and likely contributed more to the popularization of the case than anyone. Their accounts and the dramatic flair they employed ensured that the story endured through the centuries as a blend of fact and elaborate fiction. Another theory proposed in the 20th century indicates that the man in the iron mask was actually Louis XIV's father. Notably, at the time of his birth, Louis XIV's parents had been largely, though not totally, estranged for over a decade. While this hypothetical situation does potentially make sense on paper, everything about the theory is circumstantial at best and speculative at worst. However, if this theory was true, it makes sense why the individual's face was always covered, as perhaps he bore a resemblance to Louis XIV. Further, it would explain the reluctance to simply end the man, as Louis XIV was a deeply religious man, and eliminating his father would likely have been considered unforgivable. In the end, the man in the iron mask endures as a timeless symbol of secrecy and intrigue, rooted in the political and social complexities of Louis XIV's France. Despite centuries of scholarship and debate, no single theory has conclusively revealed his identity or explained the extraordinary lengths taken to confine him and conceal his identity. Instead, his legacy thrives on the tension between scant historical records and the legends spun by historians, writers, and theorists.